Tessa Nolan didn't mean to cry in the middle of the lavish hotel lobby, but when her best friend crumbled into her arms, red-eyed and shaking, she didn't hesitate to hold her tight and whisper, "It's okay, I've got you." What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that 30 feet away, Gregory Kane, CEO of Kane Worldwide and the man who could buy the entire block without blinking, had paused mid-step. His assistant had been talking, something about a board meeting in Tokyo or maybe the Paris expansion, but Greg hadn't heard a word. Because the woman across the marble floor wearing jeans, sneakers, and hugging her crying friend like the world had stopped was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. And she hadn't even looked at him. "Tell me what happened," Tessa whispered, guiding her friend, Chloe, to a nearby velvet couch. Chloe sniffled hard. "He broke off the engagement. Said I was too much. Too emotional. That I make everything a problem." Tessa blinked, steadying her voice. "That's not true. You're passionate. You love hard. That's not a flaw, it's a gift." Greg's jaw tightened. Who the hell told someone like her she was too much? He stepped slowly toward the front desk, pretending to review his phone, but his eyes kept pulling back to the woman with the soft voice and fierce loyalty. Chloe wiped her eyes. "I feel stupid. I should have seen it coming." "You're not stupid," Tessa said firmly, brushing her friend's hair behind her ears like a sister would. "You loved someone who didn't deserve you. That's brave. You'll heal. You'll find someone who sees how incredible you are." Greg felt something shift in his chest. That woman Tessa meant every word. He'd spent years surrounded by people who said nice things because they wanted something. But her? She gave because she cared. "Mr. Kane?" his assistant Drew said beside him. Greg blinked. "Yeah? The car's ready." Greg looked back toward Tessa, but she was now standing, arms still around Chloe, leading her toward the elevator. Just before they disappeared into it, Tessa glanced over her shoulder and for one heartbeat, their eyes met. She looked away first. Greg didn't. Tessa exhaled once they reached Chloe's suite. "Couch. Blanket. Ice cream. I'll handle the rest." Chloe gave her a grateful look, collapsing into the sofa. While Chloe tried to rest, Tessa wandered to the window. The hotel was far too fancy for her taste, but Chloe's ex-fiancé had paid for the weekend, promising a romantic getaway. Now it was a recovery mission. Tessa didn't mind. She worked part-time at a bookstore and taught painting classes on weekends. She had no big titles, no luxury lifestyle, but she was always the one people called when life crashed down. And honestly, she liked being that person. It made her feel useful. She had no idea her kindness had just changed the trajectory of Gregory Kane's life. 2 days later, Tessa was back in the hotel lobby, returning Chloe's key to the front desk. "You're Tessa, right?" She turned, startled by the deep, smooth voice behind her. A man stood there in a navy suit that probably cost more than her car, his dark hair slightly tousled like he'd run his hand through it too many times, and his eyes locked on hers with a focus that made her heart slam sideways. "Yes," she said slowly. "Do I know you?" He smiled faintly. "Not yet. I'm Gregory Kane." She blinked. "The Gregory Kane? As in, the guy whose name is on half the buildings in the city?" "That's the one." "Okay," she said, crossing her arms. "Why do you know my name? I saw you the other day. With your friend." She narrowed her eyes. "You were eavesdropping?" "I was passing by. And then I wasn't." She tilted her head, confused but intrigued. "Why?" "Because you were kind. Real. People don't talk like that anymore. Especially not in places like this." Tessa studied him. "So what? You came down here just to say that?" "No," he admitted. "I was hoping you'd let me buy you a coffee." She laughed once. "You're a billionaire. You don't drink coffee. You drink things with names I can't pronounce." Greg chuckled. "That's probably true. But I'd still like to sit with you. If you'll let me." Tessa looked at him, really looked, and saw something behind the polished charm, an edge of exhaustion, of loneliness. Maybe even vulnerability. "Okay," she said after a beat. "But I picked the place." They ended up at a small cafe 3 blocks from the hotel. Tessa ordered a black drip coffee and a blueberry muffin. Greg didn't even look at the menu, he just said, "Same." She arched a brow. "You don't know what I ordered." "I trust your taste." "You probably say that to every woman." "No," he said quietly. "I don't." They sat at a corner table, the city humming outside the window. Greg leaned back, watching her like she was a puzzle he wasn't in a hurry to solve. "You don't seem impressed," he said. "With what?" "My last name. My money." "I'm not. I don't care about that." He smiled, even though it clearly caught him off guard. "No one's ever said that to me." Tessa shrugged. "Honestly, I care more about how you talk to your assistant than how many jets you own." Greg laughed. "Fair enough. And for the record, I treat him well. He's been with me 12 years. Then you're already ahead of most people in your position." He leaned in slightly. "You're not what I expected." "Good." They talked for another hour. About books. About travel. About how Tessa once tried to open a cupcake truck and failed because she forgot to factor in gas prices. Greg told her about sneaking away from boardrooms just to breathe. "You ever feel like people only talk to you because they want something?" he asked, eyes on his untouched muffin. "All the time," she said softly. "But not the people who matter." When they left the cafe, he opened the door for her. "Thank you for saying yes," he said as they stepped into the sunlight. Tessa smiled. "Thank you for not being the guy I thought you'd be." Greg's heart beat faster than it had in years. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't want the night to end. Tessa stood behind the counter of Stillwater Books, brushing a stray curl behind her ear as she rang up a customer's worn copy of The Great Gatsby. The store hummed with quiet conversation and the soft rustle of pages, her favorite kind of piece. She handed the man his change with a smile, but her thoughts drifted back to yesterday's cafe conversation. Gregory Kane had been disarming in a way she hadn't expected. Not just charming, there was a depth to him, a tension behind his words, like someone who'd forgotten how to breathe until reminded. She didn't know what to make of it. Or him. "Tessa," came a voice from the back. "There's a guy here asking for you." She looked up, surprised. "Who?" Her coworker, Jonah, shrugged. "Didn't say. But he's definitely not here for Hemingway." She stepped out from behind the register, her pulse stuttering for a reason she couldn't name. And then she saw him standing by the new arrival's shelf, completely out of place in his crisp charcoal coat and polished shoes, but somehow not unwelcome. Greg noticed her before she said anything. "Hi," he said, his voice lower than she remembered, almost hesitant. "You tracked me down?" she asked, eyebrows lifting. He glanced around the store, then back to her. "You mentioned the name once." "I remembered." She crossed her arms, waiting. "I wanted to return something," he said, pulling something from his coat pocket. It was a postcard. She recognized it instantly, the one she'd used as a bookmark at the cafe. Hand-painted, with a watercolor skyline and a quote from a poem she loved. She hadn't even realized she'd left it. "I figured it might mean something to you," he added. She took it, her fingers brushing his. "It does." He looked relieved. "Good. Is that the only reason you came?" "No," he said. "But I thought it was a better opening than admitting I'd been thinking about you since we left that cafe." Tessa blinked, caught off guard. "You don't waste time, do you?" "Not anymore." She studied him. "Are you always this direct?" "I used to be careful. Measured. Now I think I've been hiding behind caution for too long." Tessa slipped the postcard into her apron. "What changed?" He hesitated. "A woman who said she doesn't care about last names." She felt her stomach flip, but forced herself to stay grounded. "So what do you want, Greg?" "Lunch. No suits. No reservations." Just something with real flavor. You pick. She should have said no. She had inventory to check, emails to reply to. But the way he stood there, not assuming, not pressing, just asking, it made it hard to refuse. There's a food truck a few blocks away. They do these ridiculous grilled cheese sandwiches. He grinned. Lead the way. They walked side by side down Maple Avenue, the February air cool but not biting. Tessa kept her hands in her coat pockets, curious despite herself. So, she said, do you ever turn it off? Turn what off? The executive thing. The power plays. The constant calculation. I don't think I ever turned it on with you. She glanced over, surprised by the honesty in his voice. I built a life where everything had to be strategic. He continued. But lately, all I want is something that isn't. And you think I'm that? I think you're real. And I'm tired of pretending real doesn't matter. They reached the food truck, a vintage silver trailer with a chalkboard menu propped outside. Tessa ordered first sourdough with smoked Gouda and caramelized onions. Greg followed without hesitation. You trust me that much? She teased. With cheese? Absolutely. They found a bench across the street. She handed him a napkin and tore open her sandwich, the melted cheese stretching between bites. Greg took his first mouthful and closed his eyes. Okay. This is outrageous. Told you. He wiped his fingers. Can I ask you something? Sure. Have you ever wanted to leave all of it behind? Start over somewhere no one knows your name? She swallowed, surprised by the question. Sometimes. But then I remember I like who I am. I just don't always like what the world does with it. He looked at her for a long moment. That makes more sense than you know. They sat in silence for a few beats, the city moving around them in slow motion. Then Greg said, I have something for you. Tessa raised an eyebrow. We just met. You don't have to give me anything. It's not a gift. It's something I think you'll understand. He reached into his coat again and handed her a small, leather-bound notebook. Old, the spine worn, corners softened with time. She opened it and stared. The pages were filled with sketches, buildings, faces, hands in motion. All done in graphite, raw and unfinished. You draw? Used to, he said quietly. Before the company. Before everything got too loud. She flipped through the book, pausing at a portrait of a woman laughing, her hair caught in the wind. Who's she? My mother, he said. She passed away before Kane Worldwide became what it is. Tessa closed the notebook gently. This is beautiful. You're talented. I forgot what it felt like to create something that didn't have a price tag. Then maybe it's time to remember. Greg's voice dipped lower. That's why I'm here. She looked up, meeting his eyes. There was something there that hadn't been before, a crack in the armor, a thread unraveling. I don't know what this is, she said softly, but it's not nothing. No, he agreed. It's not. They sat a while longer, the remnants of lunch cooling between them, neither in a hurry to move. Something had shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But enough to matter. And neither of them was ready to pretend otherwise. Tessa stood in the middle of the art studio, barefoot on the paint-splattered floor, her fingers streaked with cobalt blue and ochre. Around her, 10 students bent over their canvases, each focused on translating memory into color. The air smelled of turpentine and ambition. It was a Saturday afternoon class, her favorite time of the week until the elevator across the hall dinged. She glanced up just as Gregory Kane stepped in, dressed in dark denim and a weathered leather jacket. No tie. No designer shoes. But even stripped of the armor of wealth, he still carried the kind of presence that made people pause without knowing why. You're not enrolled, she called out without missing a beat. No, he said, scanning the room. But I brought coffee. From where? Some place called Marlowe's. The guy behind the counter said you always ask for extra cinnamon. She wiped her hands on a cloth. He's dangerously observant. So am I. She walked over slowly, accepting the cup he offered. You're lucky I'm in a good mood. Most people interrupt my classes and get paint thrown at them. Greg's eyes flicked to the canvas behind her, where a student had rendered a blurred skyline in shades of violet. This place. It's different. It's honest, she replied. People leave their egos at the door. Hard to do when ego pays your rent. Maybe that's your problem, she said, sipping the coffee. You've been in too many rooms where your name does the talking. He watched her for a long second. And you've been in too many rooms where no one listens until you raise your voice. She froze, not because he was wrong, but because he saw it. All of it. The way she constantly had to push just to be heard. She turned her attention back to the students. Why are you here, Greg? He followed her gaze. Because I wanted to see you in your world. You saw mine. You picked the wrong day. These kids are feral when I hand out critiques. I can handle feral. She shook her head, then pointed to a stool by the back wall. Fine. Sit. Watch. But if someone asks you to rinse brushes, you're doing it. He held up his hands. Deal. Once seated, he listened without interrupting, eyes tracking every gesture she made as she moved from canvas to canvas. She leaned in close when someone doubted themselves, adjusted a wrist here, offered a wordless nod there. Her presence was quiet but commanding, and the students responded to her not with fear but trust. An hour passed before she circled back to him. Well? She asked, arms crossed, specks of green paint on her cheek. You belong here, he said simply. Tessa tilted her head. And where do you belong, Greg? For the first time, he didn't have a ready answer. So she changed the subject. You ever paint? He hesitated. Not since I was 18. Why'd you stop? Because someone told me it wouldn't get me anywhere. She narrowed her eyes. And you believed them? For a while. Long enough to build a life I'm not sure I chose. She pulled a small canvas from the shelf, handed him a brush. Then maybe it's time to choose again. He looked down at the brush like it might bite him. I'm not sure I remember how. Good. That means you'll stop trying to be perfect. She left him there, surrounded by paint jars and silence, while she returned to the students. Slowly, he dipped the brush in a streak of burnt sienna and dragged it across the canvas, hesitant, but real. By the time the class ended, the sun had slipped low, casting long shadows across the room. Greg stood beside his half-finished piece, brow furrowed. It's terrible, he muttered. It's honest, she corrected. There's a difference. He glanced at her. You're not what I expected. You keep saying that. It keeps being true. They walked out together, the evening wind brushing their faces. For a moment, they said nothing. Then Tessa asked, Do you always chase people who challenge you? No, he replied. But I think I needed to. She paused outside the building, looking up at the bruised sky. You want to know the truth? Always. I don't know what this is. You and me. I don't know what you're looking for. He stepped closer, his voice quiet but steady. I'm not looking for anything. I'm finally paying attention to what I feel. That sounds dangerous. For whom? For both of us. A silence stretched between them. Then he said, I'm flying to Lisbon tomorrow. 48 hours. Board meeting. Then back. She didn't ask why he was telling her. She already knew. Safe flight, she said. He nodded once, reluctant. Then he did something unexpected. He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a folded envelope. What is it? She asked. Something I started writing last night. Didn't know if I'd give it to you. She raised an eyebrow. You wrote me a letter? I guess I did. Don't open it now. Why? Because if you read it while I'm standing here, I'll try to explain it. And I don't want to explain anything. She stared at the envelope, then tucked it into her coat. I'll read it, she said. Their eyes met in the soft light of the street lamps. No promises. No declarations. Just a quiet understanding neither of them could name. He reached for her hand briefly, warm and sure. "I'll see you soon," he said. She nodded, lips parted, but no words came. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the rhythm of the city, leaving her standing there with an unopened letter and a heart she wasn't ready to admit had already started to change. The envelope sat on Tessa's nightstand for 2 days before she opened it. She waited until her apartment was quiet, the rain tapping gently on the windows, her tea growing cold on the sill. She unfolded the thick paper carefully, hand steady, heart anything but. The letter was handwritten bold, slanted strokes that looked nothing like the decisive signatures Greg had probably scrawled on multi-million-dollar contracts. This was different. Personal. Unfiltered. He wrote about Lisbon. About how he walked through a museum between meetings and stood in front of a sculpture for nearly an hour because it reminded him of something he couldn't name. About how he didn't want to go back to the man he used to be. About how meeting her had made him realize how numb he'd become to things that mattered. At the bottom, he'd written one line that took her breath. "If you're still curious when I get back, meet me on the roof of the Hotel Belgrave at 8. She folded the letter and stared at the ceiling. She wasn't just curious. She felt like someone had cracked a door open inside her, and she couldn't go back to pretending it wasn't there. By the time Thursday arrived, she was already waiting. The rooftop was quiet, the city buzzing below like a distant heartbeat. String lights hung from the pergola, swaying in the breeze. She stood near the edge, arms crossed, trying not to look at the clock on her phone. Footsteps approached from behind. She turned as Greg stepped into view, tie undone, jacket in hand, a plain wrinkled weariness still clinging to him. But his eyes were clear. "You came," he said. "I did." Greg stepped closer, the wind tugging at his shirt cuff. "I don't usually ask for things." Tessa met his gaze. "Then don't ask. Say what you want." He hesitated, then exhaled, the words tumbling out like he'd been holding them for longer than she knew. "I want a life that doesn't feel like a negotiation. I want mornings that start with coffee and paint on your hands and conversations that don't end in strategy. And more than anything, I want to stop pretending I don't need someone who sees me when no one else does." She felt her pulse in her throat. "You're not asking for something small, Greg." "I don't want small." Tessa stepped forward until there was barely a breath between them. "I don't want to be swallowed by your world. Then we build a different one." She searched his face, looking for cracks, hesitation, bravado. There weren't any. Just quiet certainty. "I've never been someone's beginning," she said softly. "You've been mine since the moment I saw you hold your friend like the world was ending." Her breath caught. Greg pulled something from his pocket, a small, rectangular box. "I know this is fast. It's supposed to be. Because I've lost too much time pretending I needed more of it." She opened the box slowly. Inside was a silver charm shaped like a paintbrush, delicate and simple. No diamonds. No glitter. Just something that looked like it belonged in her pocket. "I'm not asking you to marry me tonight," he said. "I'm asking you to come with me tomorrow to Paris. Not for work. Just to see the sun rise from Montmartre and paint it together." Tessa stared at the charm, then at him. "You don't even know if I snore." "Then I'll learn," he said, lips curving. She laughed, the sound breaking whatever tension had been holding them both upright. "I've never been on a private jet," she said. "Then let's fix that." She closed the box, slipping it into her coat. "Okay." Greg blinked. "Okay?" "Yes." "But," she added, holding up a finger, "if you so much as suggest a 5-course tasting menu, I'm ordering grilled cheese again." He reached for her hand. "Deal." They stood there for a moment, the skyline flickering below them, headlights moving like fireflies across the dark. He leaned in slowly, letting her meet him halfway. When their lips touched, it wasn't the kind of kiss that came from months of longing. It was the kind that shifted something permanent. Steady. Intentional. Real. Tessa pulled back just enough to whisper. You're not going to wake up tomorrow and change your mind? No, he said. I already changed my life. They walked back down together, hand in hand, no more questions between them. Just a beginning that neither of them had planned, but both had chosen. And that made all the difference. The jet hummed softly beneath them, a warm cocoon of leather and gold accents. Tessa leaned against the window, her fingers curled around the charm Greg had fastened onto a delicate chain around her neck that morning. Below, the clouds stretched endless and white, but her gaze was on the man across from her, the one who'd somehow upended every expectation she'd ever held about love, wealth, and what it meant to be seen. Greg had changed clothes mid-flight, trading his usual crisp lines for a navy sweater and black slacks, and he looked more at ease than she'd ever seen him. He set his laptop aside, finally done with the last of the emails his assistant had begged him to approve before he officially disappeared from the grid, as Drew had put it. You're fidgeting, he said, nodding toward her hands. Nervous? No, she said, then paused. Maybe. I've never been to Paris. Or on a jet where the cookies weren't individually wrapped and stale. He laughed under his breath. You're not missing much. I had the cookies replaced. Of course you did. She smiled, then tilted her head. So what's the plan? Or are you finally letting life be unstructured? Greg leaned back. No driver. No itinerary. Just a hotel I booked because it has a rooftop garden and a painter once said Monet could see it from his window. She blinked. You did research. I asked the concierge. But yes, I tried. Tessa's heart squeezed. I don't think anyone's ever tried like this. He looked at her for a long moment. I never wanted to be someone who just offered diamonds and dinners. I wanted to give you something you couldn't buy. You're doing that, she said softly. Right now. Paris greeted them with an early spring drizzle and streets that glistened like mirrors. The hotel was tucked into a quiet corner of Montmartre, vines spilling over pale stone balconies, and the scent of fresh lavender wafting from a nearby florist. Greg didn't rush her. He let her linger outside the Boulangerie, watch the artists sketching in the square, and wander through a bookstall on the Seine without checking the time once. That night they climbed the staircase to the rooftop garden, fingers entwined. The air was cool, the city lights flickering below like distant stars. A single table was set near the edge, candles flickering inside glass hurricanes, and a bottle of wine breathing beside two glasses. Tessa turned to him. You said no 5-course meals? I said no tasting menus. This is just bread, cheese, and wine. You're learning. He poured the wine slowly, his hand brushing hers as he passed the glass. Can I ask you something? She nodded. What would it take for you to stay? She blinked. In Paris? No. In this. With me. Past the magic of this weekend. Tessa set her glass down. You think magic fades? I think reality has sharp enough edges to cut through anything. She considered that. I don't need perfection. I just need to be part of the life you actually live. Not the one you curate for press releases. I want that, he said, voice lower now. I want you in my real life. I want to wake up and see your hair a mess and paint under your nails. I want to argue about what movie to watch and forget anniversaries because we're too busy laughing about something stupid. She stepped closer, her fingers resting on the collar of his sweater. Then don't just take me to Paris. Take me home. He kissed her then, long and slow, the kind of kiss that didn't need permission or explanation. It was the only answer either of them needed. 3 months later, she moved into the penthouse overlooking Central Park, not because the view was expensive, but because the light was perfect for painting. Greg cleared out an entire room for her studio, no questions asked. He stopped checking his phone during dinner. She started showing up to investor galas in boots and bold lipstick, and no one dared question her place beside him. They fought sometimes, but never about the important things. He left notes in the pockets of her coats. She painted him once, without telling him, and hung it in their bedroom. He saw it one morning and stared at it for a long time. When she asked what he thought, he whispered, "That's the first time I've ever looked like myself." They traveled, but never to impress. They stayed home, but never out of habit. They built a life filled with art, honesty, and 100 tiny rituals: Saturday morning coffee by the window, Tuesday dinners with Chloe, who had since started dating a quiet editor who adored her, and late night walks through the city with no destination in mind. One spring morning, Greg joined her on the studio floor, where she was cross-legged and barefoot, dabbing at a canvas. He pulled a small velvet box from his back pocket and placed it in her lap. No fanfare, no crowd, just two people tangled in sunlight and possibility. She opened it slowly. Inside was a ring unlike anything she'd ever seen. The band was delicate, wrapped like a vine, with a single sapphire in the center. "It's not traditional," he said. "But neither are we." She looked up, eyes shining. "Is this your way of asking?" He swallowed once, then nodded. "Marry me, Tessa." Not for the parties or the press. Just for the messy, beautiful, real life we've made. She didn't wait. She didn't hesitate. Yes. They married in a garden surrounded by wildflowers and people who mattered. Greg wore navy. Tessa wore a dress she designed herself, embroidered with tiny silver brushstrokes. Chloe cried through the entire ceremony. Drew gave a toast that made everyone laugh too hard. There were no cameras. No headlines. Just vows whispered like secrets, and a kiss that felt like a beginning and a promise at once. After the last guest left, they shared a final dance in the dark, barefoot on worn wood, no music but the sound of their laughter and the breeze through the trees. Years later, they'd still talk about that night. About the rain in Paris. About the food truck. About the letter he almost didn't give her. And every time she looked at him, she'd still see the man who chose to build something real, not because it was easy, but because it was worth everything. And he'd see the woman who made him remember who he was before the world told him who to be. They never needed more than that. And they never would.